Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney Octor. I am a business development manager at intiGrow, and I am joined by two great speakers. They have been in the most complex environments. They are the two that are the identity resources. Let me introduce them. Bob Kalka, who's the global lead of IBM at IBM Security, and has well over 25 years of experience. And Jim Skidmore, the vice president of the solutions group at intiGrow. Again, he has 30 plus years of experience as it relates to identity. But enough about that. Let me pass it over to Bob, who's going to kick things off on our webinar, Modern Identity Fabric or Legacy Chaos.
Hey, thanks, Courtney. And hey, everybody, it's great to see you. Indeed, I'm in my 32nd year of doing identity stuff here. And I've been around the world many times, meeting with clients every day on this topic. And, we're working with intiGrow because they're one of our best partners around the globe. And this topic is really wild because there has clearly been a massive upheaval taking place around identity management for the last 3 years or so. About 3 years ago, the term identity fabric came out. And it came out from the analysts as really a call to action to all of us to say that the way you're doing identity management today is not sufficient. And a big part of that is the fact that when you say to anyone outside of the developer community, identity management, still most people think of human identities. Right, but by far the biggest growth has come, and we're going to go into detail on this, is coming from non-human identities. And so the identity fabric concept was originally came out to say, hey, your stuff ought to work together with other stuff out there. Now, we in the vendor community, we all have this Achilles heel, is that when there's a topic that you hear that all of a sudden people go, that's a pretty cool term. We all decide, oh, it just happens to be what my stuff does. Right? The definition of identity fabric is whatever my tools happen to do, and it clearly has happened in the identity space, especially in the human identity space. So, everybody said, hey, we do the identity fabric, just use all of our stuff. At IBM, because our core strengths are hybrid cloud and AI, is we look at everything we do through that lens. And as you're going to see here, the approach we've taken for identity fabric is, you got Octaping, intro, cell point, whatever? Cool. Yeah, we have an IDP tool, but we also have stuff surrounding our IDP that works with all the other IDPs. You can actually form this concept of identity fabric. However, what really supercharges our discussion today is that, we paid, $6.3 billion for HashiCorp last year. And HashiCorp is very well known for, of course, Terraform, but as well as HashiCorp Vault, which is the clear leader in the world around secrets management, translated non-human identities. So what we're going to talk about, what Jim and I are going to talk about here with you, is how IBM and intiGrow work together to help you address the identity mess, not only within the human side, but also fully embracing the non-human side. So there are stats upon stats upon stats. We just picked a couple of them. Our X-Force, Threat Intelligence Index, we put it out every year. You can Google it, download it, no charge. Is our IBM X-Force threat team looks at every attack and puts out detailed stats every year on what they see. And in the most recent study, it was 71% year-on-year increase in cyber attacks use compromised credentials. There's another report that asserts that 60% of all attacks are identity-based. And some of you that know this space well are probably saying, that's probably a little low. I just published this one because it's the most conservative number out there. Most people I talk to assert that roughly 80% of all attacks right now are based in identity. And there's been a couple of our competitors that have just in the last few days put out studies that basically say the same thing. And then the point is that almost everybody is facing identity-related breaches, and we think that this is a fairly underreported number to begin with. So the bottom line is we know identity, and it's interesting. I've seen a couple of papers in the last week that says, hey, the perimeters that you need to pay attention to. The most common attack surfaces now, there's three of them. There's endpoint, which we've always talked about in this industry, right? It's a 25-year-old attack surface. Endpoints, cloud, and identities. That's the three that I keep reading about. And so literally some people will say, hey, identity is the new perimeter. It is another perimeter, right, that has to be secured. So one of the things that we're going to get into is not only how do you build an identity fabric around all this stuff, including, as the title of this session talks about, how do you integrate legacy stuff? Because I can't tell you the numbers of times, and it's over 100 at least, that I've been in a conversation around this topic. And then I'll say, well, what about all those legacy apps? And everybody just kind of looks disapprovingly and says, we don't touch that stuff. That's a sunk cost. It's amazing to me how the legacy stuff, even no matter how aggressive and innovative we're being, that legacy stuff is left behind often. So we're going to show you how you don't need to leave the legacy stuff behind, right? Because we're responsible for a lot of the legacy stuff, and we know very well how to pull it in. But as the slide shows, the other hot topic is identity observability. And we're going to talk a lot more about that, because we're finding that, in the words of a dear friend of mine, a CISO for a company in the UK, said to me once, about 10 years ago, if you can't see it, you can't secure it. Well, identity observability is about, let's look at where the problems are. And I mean for both human and non-human identities, right? So we're going to get into all that here. So let's kind of just set the stage of identity fabric. And then we're going to drill down on the one form of identity that dwarfs everything else right now in terms of interest level. And we'll talk about that in a second. So when we talk about identity fabric, you got to make sure, how can I manage? How can I mitigate risks to, right? All of our identities, both human and non-human. What I find humorous is that when I go into a client for the first time and we start talking about this, inevitably you get into a discussion around the two types of identities. And I love how that comes up, because once again, it implies that there's only two types of identities, and that's workforce, consumer, internal, external, right? I mean, SIAM and workforce, as we've all talked about forever. And when I ask the client, well, how do you handle those things? Inevitably, they'll say, hey, well, we've chosen a typically SaaS-based new strategic solution in the last 3 to 5 years, if not sooner. They'll say, we've chosen a new platform, and that's our strategic platform for managing identities. Once again, with human in parens around that. And I'll say, well, what do you do for your workforce? And they'll say, well, we've got another system. And more often than not, there's several systems for the workforce. If I could tell you what the most typical environment I'm walking into today has, is they have an on-prem IAM engine that they put in 12 to 15 years ago to replace the homegrown IAM system that they put in place in the late 1990s. But of course, the legacy IAM system is still running and still supporting a bunch of legacy apps that nobody wants to touch. And so you've got a bunch of stuff there. And then once again, how do you pull in all those legacy apps, many of which either have nothing, or my favorite, all of these legacy apps that still have a side file in them that is essentially a directory of what users can get into this app. And it has to be managed like legacy. Nobody wants to touch that stuff. And then we've got one or more clouds that we got to manage identities in. So all of this is the human side of IAM, of identity access management. And you see why 80%, 60, 80% of attacks, depending on who you believe, are coming from identities. Because if I can call it the original sin of human identity management, is that we've got multiple disconnected tools and teams managing this stuff. And some of it is just out of sight, out of mind with the legacy stuff. However, as we've learned in the last 3 years, and especially in the last year, this is by far the smaller part of the problem. The much bigger part of the problem is that, depending on who you ask, there's 45 to 90 non-human identities for every human identity. And, machine identities, secure APIs, PKI, AI, agentic AI, we'll come back to that a lot. All of these non-human identities that are generally being managed by the dev teams, a lot of these. So the CISOs and the CIOs and the IT teams, they may talk, but they don't really do a whole lot together. They're all managing identities, and there's a heck of a lot more to them. And we all know that the growth rate of these types of identities is exploding compared to the number of human ones. And we say, hey, what's the original sin here for non-human identities? Well, it's their hard coding secrets in their apps, right? The developer's saying, I got to get my stuff out the door. And so I'm sure someone has some governance somewhere, but that's not my job. My job is to get this stuff out there, make it secure enough, and so they'll hard code secrets in their apps. So you have an original sin on human identity management of disconnected teams and tools. On non-human identities, you not only have that being done disconnected from what the rest of the organization is doing, right? But you've got this explosion in hard coding the secrets and a lack of visibility into that. So you wonder why so many attacks are coming from identities, right? This shows that if you can build a fabric to get all of this stuff to work together, you're coming onto something, right? So we work with our HashiCorp colleagues, now part of IBM, constantly on literally an hourly basis over the last year on what are the issues that you need to address to get into this. And I'd assert to you that of several dozen use cases that we see people wanting to be able to do that they're unable to do, there's 6 that really stand out. First is identity observability. On the human side of things, can you find not only shadow identities, but the big one right now is shadow directories. Typical shop we walk into right now will have dozens of user directories that were set up 3 years ago for projects that ended 2 years ago and are supposed to be taken down, but there's still 53 people authenticating this thing every day. IT isn't really paying attention to it because they thought they were gone, right? So you've got all these shadow directories. You also have shadow assets, shadow access, and stuff like that. That's on the human side. On the non-human side, the observability is needed to discover a couple of things. One, the biggest one, is to find the shadow secrets, the hard-coded secrets, right? So find that stuff and make sure that you can identify that so you can get out of that horrific practice of hard-coding secrets, because obviously, if you're hard-coding secrets, right, you reverse engineer the code, and there you go. You can spoof very easily and pretend that you're that asset. So identity observability is, some people like to call this posture management. There's a acronym that's been out a couple of years of ISPM, Identity Security Posture Management. This essentially maps to that. That's the first piece. Second piece is the human experience, and that's frictionless access, right? So we're client zero for that here at IBM. Our entire company, we manage 30.5 million identities with our Verify platform between internal and external. For all of our internals, we went to passwordless about 1.5 years ago. And it has had such a profound impact on productivity and lower back-end costs for support that, our CIO office has announced basically we're going to get rid of passwords as even being an option internally. So that shows you that this stuff works and it's for the right reasons. Then we get into the developer side of things. Instead of hard coding secrets, let's go to a centralized, well-governed secrets management engine. So you have an audit path, you have accountability on what is a secret getting generated for, and you can audit that it was done. Now, what's wild is that almost 100% of all the users of secrets management engines like HashiCorp Vault are just doing static secrets. They're centralizing them, but they're still static. So it's more secure than hard coding, but relatively more secure. Where there's a huge amount of activity is dynamic secrets, and that's short-lived secrets. Now, short might be a couple of minutes, it might be a couple of weeks, right, depending on the risk and everything that you're doing. But moving towards dynamic secrets becomes important, especially when you talk about the number one hot type of non-human identity, as I kind of alluded to before, which is agentic AI. We're going to dive a lot into that. Somehow, PAM That's the fifth use case that we see everybody struggling with. Everybody does PAM, but they only do it to a subset of their PAM identity population. And so getting that locked in for both human and non-human. And then the final is kind of the opposite side of identity observability. If observability is finding the shadow directories, the shadow hard-coded secrets in the apps, the other side of it is identity threats. So a lot of people like to call this ITDR, identity threat detection and response. And this is detecting actual risks based on identities. So on the human side, a very common example of that would be bypassing MFA. Can't tell you the number of clients I've walked into. And they said, oh, well, users in this role accessing this set of sensitive applications, policies, they have to use MFA, and we've constructed this in a way there's no way they can avoid that. Really? Almost every shop we walk into, you'll see users from that group getting access to this application, and the MFA engine is never invoked, is never queried, is never touched, is never done. And at first we get it, that's impossible. And then you look at what happened and go, oh, if those 7 exceptions are present, you actually can get around it. So that's on the human side is like bypass MFA. On the non-human side, this is very interesting. It's things like bypassing the actual secrets management engine. Let's say that you've got a policy that an AI agent must have a unique identifier, a unique non-human identity, right? A unique secret tied to it, so you can have accountability. And that then when that accesses some backend sensitive data, for example, you've got a full accountability path. Well, what happens if you can see in real time that here's an agent that just popped up, inherited a bunch of rights, accessed this backend data, and there was no secret ever issued related to it, right? So bypassing secrets management, bypassing identity management for the non-human identities is also a huge deal and a much bigger one than anything else we've talked about. So these are the 6 use cases. Once again, there's many more, but these are the 6 that we see coming up all over the place. So our general approach with IBM and intiGrow is to say, well, to address cases like this, we've got inspect, protect, and govern. So first, we want to give you the ability to find all those shadow assets. I mentioned, by the way, shadow secrets hard-coded in the apps and shadow directories and stuff like that. But another discovery element, and this is for all the CISOs and IT people out there, is so there's a real issue that when we go into a client and do discovery, in the developer community, we will often find a dozen instances of HashiCorp Vault Community Edition that are managed by dev teams, no integration between them. We'll find that a bunch of the dev teams are using the built-in like certificate management systems in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. So you have this massive non-connected fabric of secrets managers that dev is using, and there's no governance around that at all. That's another form of discovery, is can you find how sloppy it is out there? Because what we found is that that's gold, not only for the development community to realize what a mess it is, but for the CISO and IT, because it gives everybody a common platform to talk from. So anyways, this inspection thing is huge. Then you get into protection, secrets management, both static and dynamic based on the risk profile. You got PAM, you have ITDR, like the detect bypass of both MFA as well as bypass of the non-human secrets engines, and even behavioral analytics. So if you have a credential compromise, can you use AI to actually determine that when the hacker authenticates using the stolen credentials, you can tell from things like their typing rate that that's not the identity that logged in the last 342 times into that account, even though they have the right credentials, the behavior doesn't match, right? So that's another example of the type of stuff that we do. And then, by the way, and once again, that works with any IDP out there. And then finally, governance. You want to make sure you can do this stuff on a repeat basis. So from an IBM point of view, the way that we deliver this identity fabric is that we start with secrets management, static and dynamic. Clearly, HashiCorp Vault is the class act of the industry around that. And then we also have an offering called Vault Radar, which does the actual scanning, looking for the hard-coded secrets and where they're being shared in GitHub and stuff like that. Then for frictionless access, passwordless, 502 passkeys, etc., that's built into Verify. For clients that have a IDP other than Verify, such as Octoping, ForgeRock, Entra, you'll notice I've got in gray here, it says Verify Application Gateway. That is a capability within Verify that works with any IDP that allows you to integrate in your legacy apps, including like Webster apps, right? A lot of our competitors do not support pulling in the massive amounts of Webster apps that are out there. And we support them in many other types of apps. So you can extend your IDP with Verify Application Gateway to literally extend your policies that you're setting in the IDP to these legacy applications. Then when we get into how do you actually do governance and make sure you're securing access and detecting the thing I just talked about finding a compromised identity of someone logging in that has different behavior. That's built into our Verify platform, but for folks that have a different IDP, like the ones I mentioned, we have a product called Verify Trust, and that's an AI engine that does that compromised credential detection of someone logging in with a different behavior, different typing rate, different all that stuff, works with any IDP. And so you see that when we talk about identity fabric, we're talking truly multi-vendor, not you have to use my stuff and throw out anything else. Around governance, obviously, we've done that a long time. And then for PAM, we have our Verified Privileged Identity solution, which is based on our very tight partnership with Delinea. And then we also have from the HashiCorp team, Boundary for the developer community for PAM, which is very powerful. But as I've said a couple of times, there's two big points, like the two biggest points we'd like you to take away from our discussion today is, first of all, what makes all this work, what makes the fabric real is being able to see it, is being able to do identity observability. And so we've come out with about a year and a half ago now, an incredibly innovative AI engine called Verify Identity Protection. And it does what I called on that previous slide, both observability and the threat detection, ISPM and ITDR. It finds the shadow assets and directories. It finds the MFA bypass. It finds the secrets management bypass, right? And so we're going to talk a lot more about that because it's really key, because I'm telling you, as soon as everyone can see what's going on in real time, it allows you to actually move forward instead of just having philosophical discussions around what we should do together to get our act together between CISO, IT, and dev, right? So, but I also asserted to you there's one type of identity that's making all of the rest of this look like it's, on the second level, and that is agentic AI, right? Agentic AI is just a form of non-human identity at the end of the day. And so how can we do effective identity access management as a fabric across all the stuff that you have for agentic AI? So let's dive on that one a little bit more, because it's not even debatable. This is the hottest topic I'm seeing everywhere that I'm going, because frankly, there's always been a little tension between IT, CISO, and dev, right? Dev's like, leave us alone. We're kind of the people driving growth here. Get out of our way, people. Get off our lawn, kind of thing. And everybody's like, well, but we got to work together, but we're not sure how to actually do it. We're not exactly what those folks are doing over there. What's forced that to start changing is the fact that when you look at how agentic AI actually runs in real time, it blows out the static human-centric model we've had for decades around identity management. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a simple example. You get a user invoking some kind of application that invokes some kind of AI agent, and then potentially several, embedded agents, other things are kicked off. And eventually you get to some agentic AI that actually goes and accesses something material on the back end, like a sensitive data or a mainframe or whatever it happens to be. right? So what makes this interesting, as I said, is that this kind of points the finger at, as are all these groups working together well? And if I'm being totally blunt with you, is my typical conversation with a CISO these days, and I say, what are you doing with the developer team? The most common answer I get is, can you close the office? Can you close the door of my office before I answer this? And they'll say, we have a monthly call with the dev team. And I'll say, what do you discuss? Well, initiatives of how we could work together. And I say, well, then what do you talk about the next month? We talk about ideas of initiatives where we could work together, and so on. It keeps going on. Like lots of interesting ideas and maybe a little tactical things, but it's just like circling each other, looking at each other, funny kind of thing. The reason agentic AI is forcing that sort of inertia to get blown up is because as soon as you introduce agentic AI, you introduce some gaping security holes that most people aren't even aware of. And here's the big four. So first of all, accountability. What percentage of agents out there go and literally have the governance to make sure that I have some kind of secret or cert or key or something that uniquely identifies me, and that secret cert key is being well governed and managed, right? It's a small percentage. So what happens is when AI agents pop up and start doing things and don't have a unique non-human identity assigned to them, you've lost accountability. Because when something happens, you can't figure out who did what because you have all these agents interacting and you don't know each one. You don't get that level. So accountability is the first problem. Second problem, overprivilege. You talk about an eternal PAM problem here, is that the agents will pop up and they'll inherit a bunch of rights from whoever invoked them. And then does anybody check that all of those inherited rights are accurate, especially for the source trying to access some sort of destination? Are those inherited rights congruent with that? Nobody knows. Third, delegation. A lot of these agents will get delegated rights. And sometimes, if I could be playful with it, developers can get lazy and say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with getting a separate secret for this type of agent. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to inherit the identity of the human who upstream invoked me. So essentially doing impersonation. Now, that may work, but the problem is you've lost accountability now at this point, because if that agent does something, everybody says, you user did that, and I go, I didn't. It's because something that was impersonating that user is doing workflows that actually aren't it. And then the one that stops everybody in their tracks is the last mile problem. The last mile problem is once you get to that final agent accessing some sensitive data, just as an example, at that point, you've got an agent with a bunch of rights, accessing sensitive data. And so the obvious thing is, so who does the final check to make sure that that agent should be able to access that data based on the risk profile and all the stuff? Who's checking that? Nobody is. That's the last mile problem. It's wide open. Nobody looks. Nobody's checking. Nobody's doing governance on it. So that last mile problem alone is the what? That especially is driving CISOs nuts, and is driving a lot of activity right now to say, wait a minute, IT, dev, we literally got to work on this because there's a whole risk profile, a whole risk wall over here that we are not addressing, right? So what do you do about it? So this one is white hot. You'll see that the same things I discussed generally around human and non-human earlier in the call come up to play here, but the three biggest ones are these. One is orchestration. How do you orchestrate a human and a set of non-human identities accessing something, making sure that the orchestration works in tandem with full accountability? That's point number one. How does the human and non-human systems work together? Secondly is governance, right? How do we do things like the last mile? How do we make sure that check, that last access, is always checked for validity? And then the third one, which is white hot, is observability. Now, what does observability mean in terms of of agentic AI in particular. I've already shared with you that observability includes both the posture management as well as the real-time threat detection. Well, on the posture side of things, part of it is what I've shared a few minutes ago. How many secrets managers are you using? Not are you using secrets at all, but how many of them are you using, and are they coordinated at all? That's a big one right now, because that's most people are having problems with that one right now, right? So that's part of it. Also part of it is, are you even using a secrets management engine, right? Do you even have one that's being used in the standard flows as you're developing, et cetera, to make sure that it's required that you are actually doing that step of getting a non-human identity? And then the threat management side of it is, this is very common, the agent's supposed to get a unique identifier from something like HashiCorp Vault, and then it accesses, and you've got accountability because you know what that is. And by the way, often the secrets that are used for agentic AI are dynamic. They're short-lived, which is good because that's what they should be. But so what happens, can you detect when there is an AI agent that accesses backend data and the secrets manager was never invoked, which means you have a bypass of the policy, right? So observability allows you to do that stuff. So what Jim and I are going to show you here is how we actually do all this stuff, right? Because this is, once again, of all the human and non-human identity stuff, this is the one that is getting the most attention for obvious reasons, I hope, to you, right? So the way we do that is that we have done integration between IBM Vault and IBM Verify. So obviously IBM Vault is HashiCorp Vault. IBM Verify is our IDP that, once again, also works with anybody else's IDP. So what I'm showing you here is independent of the IDP. We can do some cooler things in Verify than others like Okta can do. But regardless of your IDP, you can actually address this stuff with us. And then VIP, as I'll talk more about in a minute, it stands for Verified Identity Protection, which is our observability platform, which is also an AI engine. So let's talk about Vault first for a moment. Look, Vault is the gorilla of the secrets management market. Tens of thousands, many clients out there. Every time we do an update, there's over 250 million downloads of it. Vault is the engine, and it not only does static secrets, which is where most people are today, but it does the dynamic secrets. And I assume it's intuitive to you how a dynamic secret and agentic AI is like match made in heaven, right? Because you want to make sure it's short-lived, has very scoped rights, least privilege, and stuff like that. But what it also allows when you go to the dynamic secrets, it actually helps immensely in a bunch of other areas, reduce the time spent of managing the secrets, because the secrets management engine, right, Vault, does it for you. Clearly, it helps you with the compliance. When an auditor walks in and sees that you've introduced fully governed dynamic secrets, they go, "Woo, you're in the minority, but you're in the right part of the minority right now." And then you improve the security posture. So there's lots of different dynamic secrets engines out there today. And one of the powerful things about HashiCorp Vault is it allows you to work with all of these, which is pretty darn impressive. Now, I've also mentioned Vault Radar. That's, once again, our ability to find hard-coded secrets in your applications. So on the discovery side of things, the posture management, the identity observability side of things, HashiCorp Vault Radar is a new product we just came out with recently that allows you to find that stuff. So in all the things I've talked about, shadow identities and shadow secret managers and all that, that comes from IBM Verified Identity Protection. The only form of posture that is not in VIP is actually getting into the code and finding those hard-coded secrets, and that is Vault Radar. Now, I keep talking about this observability platform, VIP. This phrase that I just put up on the screen is something I've seen a lot of vendors using, which is kind of humorous to us because the phrase was actually coined by our development partner on Verified Identity Protection about 5 years ago. It's hackers don't break in, they log in. So you got to be able to detect it as happening. So it's a combination, once again, of ISPMs, posture management, and ITDR of threats. And that is something that we call IBM Verify Identity Protection. the magic behind this thing, as soon as you see this, it makes total sense. The way we're able to find both human and non-human posture problems, shadow assets, directories, shadow secrets managers, and then see runtime of bypassing fault, bypassing MFA, comes from the fact that it's an AI engine that's been tuned for almost 5 years now that pulls all your net flows, cloud flows, and identity events. And it's an AI engine that's got 5 years of understanding regular patterns for that, and then very quickly adapting to what happens in your shop and finding the things that don't make sense. That's how we're able to observe these bypasses and the shadow assets on both the human and non-human side, including the agentic AI. We have a beautiful dashboard that brings you all of the most pressing things to the forefront. And what's beautiful about it is that for any one of them, you can get down to the level that when you say this flagged, and it goes back in time because it sees all the events and it shows it to you. This is how this bypass, for example, happened. This happened, this happened, this happened, this didn't happen, and it shows it to you. It gives you that power. I would assert to you that from a corporate dynamics, organizational dynamics point of view, what's most powerful about it is that it actually gives dev, IT, and CISO all the same visibility into what's actually going on. So instead of just talking about theoretical stuff, you can actually do something with it. All right, so there's about 150 different use cases that VIP finds, but these are the ones that are most common, and I've already mentioned all of them, right? The shadow assets, the shadow directories, the bypasses, not only MFA and secrets management, but bypass of ZTNA, VPN, even bypass of PAN. It can detect all that because once again, it's just looking at what's going on relative to identity things and takes it from there. So what happens is you hook, and it's very flexible. You can hook into your network. If you're already sort of minimizing network alerts into your SIM, you can just pull that feed into VIP. You can hook to any identity management system out there. And so it's very easy to set up. And what it does is it builds the map of how do things generally work, learns it, and then finds when there's something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As I said, there's a lot of ways you can set this thing up. You can tie directly into the network and the cloud feeds, or if you've already done some first level minimization of noise, we can use those feeds for this thing, which is a common thing. Once you have this ability to do both posture and threat detection, I'm going to pick on the Change Healthcare breach just for a minute, because it just shows you, if you look at the major milestones in that breach, if you have this kind of observability, you could find it, right? So when the 0 day happened, is detecting unexpected access to exposed assets. Because if you're looking at the flows and the identity activity, you can say, wait a minute, we've got access to an asset that was unexpected. Should we check that? And then finally, when the new admin account, when the famous cloud admin thing, so attempts to enumerate accounts, detecting access with weak creds, or of course brute force attacks, we can detect that. Then when you get to the lateral movement, where the ransomware was downloaded from a cloud file share, detecting use of a new cloud file share that's never been seen in the environment, catch it on the spot, flags it to you, says, hey, this looks a little fishy. And then finally, on the fourth phase of follow through with the C2C communications, as soon as those communications start, we'll catch it. We'll say, hey, you've got this bizarre communication thing going on. You got to take a look at it. So that's what observability does. So that's what VIP is all about. So let me summarize that. I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he can tell you how intiGrow can help you put all this stuff into effect and actually implement in your environments. Because if you think about where we started the conversation, a year ago, the hot topic was, hey, we really ought to pay attention to both human and non-human identities. Agentic AI has just dwarfed everything on that because it's exposing all of the issues we have, not only technically, but also organization between dev, IT, and CISO. And so it's a combination of addressing human and human and non-human identity combined with this identity observability not only allows you to address the generic issue of human and non-human identity management through a fabric. As I shared with you, we have a number of technologies that, independent of what IDP you use, will help you integrate legacy apps and look at credential compromise and stuff like that, but also allows you to address the most pressing issues in agentic AI today that most people are just really learning. And so that's what we do here. So, we in intiGrow would love to come in and show you some of this stuff of how we could do that. And I think, Jim, let's go over to you and talk about how you guys do that so well with us.
Yeah, so we do have sort of the security. Yeah, I can give you 2 minutes, first of all, on kind of what we do if you're not familiar with intiGrow. We're just focused as an MSSP and as a security integrator and strategy organization. Very well focused on managed IBM products. Also, a number of free assessment component capabilities that we provide for people. And that's how we get most of our clients, to be honest. So, as Bob said, there are a million different pain points that people have as they've mutated over the last few decades. Our goal is to help them go through that transformation. Yeah, you can probably flip over to the next one, Bob, if you would do so. So some of the things that we do for people, excuse me, really involve readiness and helping them to understand what a roadmap might look like to solve their specific issue. So Bob was just talking about VIP, for example. If you look at the second bullet, the posture assessment is something that we come in, and literally it's the only tool on the market that we're aware of or familiar with. And we work with multiple tools on the market, and work with Gartner and best of breed, organizations to make sure that we're in the right spots. But to be able to see that identity activity in flight, that observability, is uncommon throughout the industry. Excuse me. You will not see that anywhere else. So we do help folks to understand what they're not seeing today and what some of that looks like, because sometimes it's a very big eye opener. Identity, data compliance, health check, and remediation. A lot of folks are having a little bit of a challenge there. They might be trying to unify their security posture, but they have a number of different identity directories, or what we call LDAPs, that they have orphans in. They have, as Bob was talking about earlier, unmanaged AD forests. They have all kinds of repositories that they can't figure out what to do with, and therefore they're failing. NERC and FERC, for example, in energy, or Sarbanes-Oxley for public companies, or Graham Leach for finance, or HIPAA, or whatever. So we do help folks go through that. We also look at zero trust maturity. If everybody hasn't heard the word zero trust a million times in the last decade, you've probably been living under a rock. But the net is that we do literally help people to look at their global infrastructure and figure out what their role and attribute models look like, looking for large opportunity to reduce that access for thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of users in their enterprise, to really reduce the risk there. Because I'm not sure everybody really understands the ramifications. A lot of organizations will go in and just say, okay, we'll take an application in your role repository and we'll put it through our tool and we'll show you how to reduce that. Well, most people have hundreds of network segments. They might have 1,000 applications. It's a very complex undertaking if you don't undertake what I would call a pound of planning. So we help folks to do that. Obviously AI corporate policy development comes into play here. I won't go into the attack surface management or pen testing side of it, but the corporate policy development is something that we do for folks, because if they can get out in front of the agentic AI users, for example, i.e., a developer logs in to your daily stand-up, is accessing development code, oftentimes with an ungoverned AI agent tool that they just happen to like. All they're doing is sucking data from all over the enterprise against policy, against the audit requirements, and often against the law. So part of the challenge there is, one example is we recently worked with a giant law firm where the agentic AI person was logging in, gaining access to every piece of data that was there, which was not segmented. So they had equal access to plaintiff data and defendant data and legal judgment files and things. If anybody knew in that firm that was a client that they were doing that, they would launch a class action suit and that firm would be gone tomorrow, right? So the net is the agentic AI, as Bob said, deluge right now that's going on is dangerous, to say the very least, right? So part of what we try to do in the corporate policy development, obviously the observability and all the other capabilities that Bob talked about are wonderful, assuming things are very broken. What we try to do for organizations that can ingest this type of behavior is help them get out in front of that. Right? You're not allowed to use AI tools that are not on the governed list. You're not allowed to go against LLMs that have not been curated and have not been sort of approved for use for a certain use case in the enterprise. You're just not. And so on and so forth. So we go through a lot of process there to kind of help people not get to the giant mutation point that most people are already at, quite frankly. So these are some of the areas that we focus on. I would say a lot of the folks that we work with these days are focused on modernization too, because when you look at everything Bob talked about earlier, let's face it, there's, for someone that's really big, really complex, and really mutated, that's a lot of to-dos to do. So we try to help them unify their security posture. Excuse me, for example, by getting all the identity information into one place or consolidating that. And then they can go back to enforcing policy across on-prem, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments even, which is helpful. Also, we help them modernize legacy systems. So, for example, if somebody's using a lot of Linux and Unix and AS400, and say if they're a warehouse storage facility part of it, or Z series, and they're working with a multitude of different identity stores, even on their mainframes, which a lot of our clients are, quite frankly, we can help them consolidate RACF, ACF2, Top Secret, all of these identity repositories into one place. And we can also modernize the authentication into those by making that, a SAML authentication into there, or an OIDC one to older legacy applications that we can still manage centrally, but without having to do code changes on their side. So that's another way to kind of simplify and pull things to the center for governance. As Bob was talking about earlier, we're talking a little about risk-based authentication. Now we can use all kinds of things, behavioral biometrics. We can see if somebody's logging in even from a device, what a device risk profile of that device would look like. We can use contextual data, through the fabric now. We can look at geolocation of where the event is coming from. We can look at IP reputation of where that login, formally has been, and we can help, clients to adapt to that authentication in real time and make changes to what people have access to in real time. So I won't go into all the threat detection part. I know Bob talked about that. It is very valuable to be able to collect threat intel from anywhere you can, if you operate a tip or if you understand what you want to be able to blacklist. But obviously ITDR gives you that opportunity, and we can protect your entire identity infrastructure in one firewall-like segment. Obviously, Bob talked about bridging the gap between human and machine identities. Understanding where all of that is critical now more than ever, because like anything else, it's just going to get worse. A lot of the folks that we know that have problems with this now are paying the sins of their forefathers because they haven't done it 10 years ago. And it's like everything's okay, right? But now with AI, I think we're all pretty laser, I don't want to say paranoid, but aware that things are going on and that we really need to enforce policy to a degree. The problem is 99% of folks have no idea how to go about thinking about that. And granted, it's because they've been doing their job, right? As a CISO, as a director of development, as Bob mentioned, the important part is not to worry about whether I'm rotating passwords in my secrets repository. The important thing is to worry about getting our release date on Thursday at 2 p.m. IST, right? So, the net is we're able to work in a single fabric across, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, really diverse infrastructures from AWS to Azure to almost anywhere else, and manage all of the provisioning, deprovisioning, governance, compliance, and really secret safety from one place. I would nearly say a single pane of glass, but I don't use that term anymore. So, these are part of the complementary maturity assessments that we provide for folks. Oftentimes, we help them to think through things that maybe they're standing too close to at times. But we also understand the ramifications on the compliance side. And I think to Bob's point also help sometimes to bring them together, especially when we look at like posture management, like he was talking about before. This is not us against you. This is all of us looking about how can we better ourselves, right? And continuously improve and make ourselves safer. I've never met a board member, a CEO, a COO, a CFO, or anybody else that didn't want that level of visibility or to be able to continuously improve the organization. Because there are, by taking these stances, a lot of savings that can be had as well. We haven't talked about automating password resets today. We do that, right? We haven't talked about a lot of other use cases that can make life simpler, and that there is, quite frankly, business value in doing that saves money. And I would argue in many cases helps people make more money faster. So that's just a little about some of the maturity assessment things that we do. I know it's been a lot to drink today. There are so many people in different places in their journey, but wherever you are in your journey, we're happy to help you gain some perspective on where you may go from here. There's no requirement, no pressure, no anything else. We feel as though we do work with CISA and we work with a number of other organizations, even on a gratis basis, helping people to figure this out, because I think the need and the duty for all of us is bigger than any one of us. So, yeah, I guess we can kind of move on if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, I'm going to just jump in because since you're on that slide, we did get a question from Ash. Because we do the AI corporate policy assessments, but Ash was asking, what about AI security posture assessments? So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, we absolutely do. AI security posture assessment. The policy assessment that was there is a larger version of that, right? Because we're looking at enterprise security policy. Posture is really going to be the rules and the precursors that are required for you to, to even go about bringing an AI agent or other component into your enterprise. So yes, we absolutely do that as part of the overall policy. And I think I know, Ash, and that's a great question. So thanks for asking it. Are there any additional questions, Courtney?
Kind of before we wrap up, just one final question. How would this fabric work if we have other identity solutions in the enterprise? And I know, Bob, you covered this extensively, but for those that might have joined late, would love to get either one of your answers on this.
Yeah, it's irregardless of what IDP you use, whether it's Octoping, ForgeRock, Entra, right, or our Verify stuff. The way we've done this, it works with all of them. So HashiCorp Vault can integrate with any of those. If the client doesn't have IBM Verify, then we have the ability to extend the legacy app integration, the detection of use of compromised accounts, etc., to any other IDP. And then Verify Identity Protection with both posture management as well as the ITDR capability can see across every IDP. So that's why when we called this thing today Identity Fabric, because it's both human and non-human identities, and it works regardless of what your core IDP is.
Yeah, the term we generally use is unified security posture, right? So if there are multiple other identity providers out there that you're utilizing, Entra might be one of them. As Bob mentioned, there's a cadre of other ones. Making sure that they can all come to us one place for, provisioning, deprovisioning, role management, attribute management, all the overall governance components is critical. And we can easily provision any other identity repository out there. So I've never yet run into one that we couldn't do. And we have a thing called Verify Directory Integrator that is incredibly flexible that allows us to do that. I can tell you I've worked on things involving governmental aerospace, other unusual application use cases kind of all over the place that have not been overall a challenge for that synchronization. So just to let you know, that is the case. We don't have challenges doing that. Makes life easier because people can be audited and they'll realize who's actually in the central directory in the LDAP, which is one of the first things auditors look for is orphans, as we say. So unifying that security posture is something we seek to do, no matter who else, what other IDPs you have.
Awesome. Any final words before we kind of wrap this up, Bob, Jim?
I think we're good. Let's work with us because we've not done this a few times. And the universality, if I can use that term, of the agentic AI issue is very, very real and becoming a red alert for every shop we're walking into.
Yeah, it's big chat everywhere you go right now. I'm on some government groups and think tanks and things like that, and it's the talk of the town right now. So, but I think we also have a rare opportunity, and I would close with this, to say that we can get out in front of this, right? This is not like not governing the internet before it came out. This is not like, we knew that especially when really Gen AI, really popped out a couple of years ago, a lot of us have been working with machine learning and AI for, more than a decade or two. But the net is, if you're heading down a business strategy road right now, you're going to spend, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in terms of the direction that you're heading. As Bob mentioned, regardless of where you are along the journey, we have a way to solve the issue that you're looking at along the fabric chain here. But the net is, people that wait till 3, 4, or 5 years from now to try to fix things may create things that are not fixable. and they may have policy violations that they're not going to be able to battle back from. So, all I would say.
Thank you so much for your time. We will be sending out a recording, and I'll echo Bob's sentiments. Bob and Jim are great resources and sounding boards as you begin this journey or you're looking for more information. So would be happy to connect with you to have a deeper discussion on this. Thank you all for your time. Bob, Jim, thanks so much. Until next time, we hope to see you again.
Indeed.
Thank you all.